Good evening, or whenever it is you're watching this. Welcome back to Sentimental Elephants. We are continuing our musical journey, or my musical journey, as a trip through my past, talking about my relationship with music and different artists, going through the alphabet and finding an artist for each letter to match that, and talking about my own particular journey, my own personal story with that artist, how I came to discover them, and my history with their music. So today we have reached the F word. We are getting freaky here on Sentimental Elephants with F. I've said before I like some mainstream music and I like some kind of weirder stuff, and it's been fairly relatively mainstream so far. A was the Allman Brothers Band, great blues rock band with some progressive and jazz influences. Uh, Kate Bush, a bit more, a little bit more experimental, but she's now going into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. About freaking time. Sia's Chicago had lots of AM hits. D the Doors, kind of strange band, but they still kind of fit in that classic rock genre. Eagles, fairly mainstream. So when are we going to get to the weird stuff? Today we are getting to the weird stuff. We do the weird stuff. So what do we got for F? Well, obviously there's Fleetwood Mac, Funkadelic, classic. We got some weird stuff going in there. Ben Folds, both on his own and with his three men of five. Fountains of Wayne, R.I.P. Adam Schlesinger. Sorry, I didn't want to mispronounce his name. Great songwriter. They actually had some really cool songs besides Stacy's Mom. Radiation Vibe is a wonderful song. So check that out. Fairport Convention. Sorry, Jay. Fathering Gay. Donald Fagen from Steely Dan. Progressive goth legends Fields of the Nephilim. The Finn brothers, Tim and Neil. Foghat, the Flying Burrito Brothers, and the Mighty Fall. Yes, we'll be doing the Fall today. Probably to a lot of people, whoever might be viewing this, they may well be the most obscure one so far. Bit of a challenge. I've got a few pages of notes. Still not sure where I'm going to go with this one. But yeah, so they're post-punk Manchester band from founded in the late 1970s. Let's see, how do I describe? Well, one of their album titles, and they've got a lot of great album titles, sums them up quite neatly with the phrase, "The Wonderful and Frightening World of the Fall." Couldn't really describe them any better, and it's pretty much impossible to truly describe them. They started out as a post-punk band. They really didn't fit in with the punk sound or scene. They don't really fit in anywhere. It was kind of a primitive sound early on, but also taking a lot of musical chances. It's hard to describe their appeal as much as it is their sound. Later in the 80s, they got more pop, actually had some hits. And in the 90s, they started with kind of a bit of a harder edge. I don't know if I quite say techno, but there's more keyboard driven sound, but still maintaining that bite and weirdness that made them so appealing to people like me. There have been many past members of the Fall. According to the Wikipedia article, there have been 66 members, including the one constant, lead singer and lyricist Mark E. Smith. He once said, "If it's me and your granny on bongos, then it's a Fall gig," and that was the truth for as long as it lasted. Until his passing in 2018. That's when the Fall basically ended, so he couldn't really have the band without him. He also had, at different times, a couple of his different wives, and contrary to sort of the way that trope frequently works, or is prejudice in the head of people, those are actually very peak periods. Brick Smith on guitar and keyboards when she was there in the mid to late 80s. She had a really brought a real brightness, and even though there was more of a pop influence there, the quality of the music for my lights did not drop off. They got the fact that could be a little bit more appealing to normal people. I don't know. I'm not sure I know any normal people, but even though it could have a bit more potential mass appeal, didn't change the fact that it was still very daring. And she actually came back. It was after the divorce. When they got divorced, she left the band, but she came back for a little bit in the mid '90s and did a couple of albums. Particularly like Use Your Syndrome, which is the second one that she was on in that run, and that's one of my favorite albums. This is very strong work. Later in the 21st century, a subsequent wife of his, I'm not sure how many he had in the end. I think might have been 3, but he was married to Elena Polo, who is a keyboard player in the Fall. And again, there's a lot of good work that came in that period. As I said, 66 different members, so bit too much to really go into in depth. But notable are guitar player Craig Scanlon and Steve Hanley, who's the bass player, and they joined the band in 1979. And Scanlon stayed around until 95, and Steve Hanley on bass, he left in 98. They were, most consistent members during that period. Mark E. Smith was apparently not very easy to get along with as leader. He went through a lot of different musicians. He's a bit of a character. It's a bit of a challenge to really sum him up. Kind of frequently sort of one note speak singing. He was very belligerent. Did a lot of amphetamines, drank a lot of alcohol. I saw a documentary on it on the Fall. It was on YouTube if you want to check it out, called The Wonderful and Frightening World of Mark E. Smith. I believe that was the title of it. And it's very interesting. I gotta say this. Whenever he started talking, I'm the more I watch it, the more I pick up. But early on, I was like, I'm getting one word in 3. He could slur his vocals. It was sometimes hard to make out what he was saying. His vices kind of took a toll. He showed up in the movie 24-Hour Party People, which is one of my favorite movies. I think he would have been in his 40s at that point. He looked about 90. He was not in great shape. Very abrasive, very belligerent, kind of difficult to really say what's the word genius gets trotted out a fair amount with him. I don't disagree with that at all, but it's a genius. It's a bit challenging to really describe. We'll get into this in a bit. Now, their earlier work, the 70s, as I say, was very dark, very dense, very heavy. Then hit the early 80s period. We're going into a bit more history than I normally go into, because I think this is one of the more new to people, more likely to be a band that's new to people, might not necessarily know the background. The early 80s was, in my view, my favorite period. Still had that rough-hewn post-punk feel, but is a lot of very sort of challenging stuff, a lot of sort of musical excitement. Some of their best albums, in my view, came out during that period. Grotesque, Slates, Grotesque After the Gram. They have pretty fascinating album titles. Grotesque After the Gram, Slates, and Hex Induction Hour. later on in the 80s, that's when Brooks E. Smith joined. They started slowly accumulating a bit more of a pop feel, and the musicianship did tighten up a bit. It was before it was fairly loose, but still but exciting, and then it got to a bit more surface professional sounding. Again, some great albums with that great album titles. Perverted by Language is a wonderful title, and it's a great album. Um, what is it? Our Nation Saving Grace, Friends Experiments, I Am Curious Orange. Those are the kind of the peak late 80s albums. They started to actually have some chart hits, at least in England, including some covers. They did a cover of There's a Ghost in My House by R. Dean Taylor. And I think their biggest hit was Victoria, which was originally done by the Kinks. After Bricks left, the 90s, they remained very productive. That's when they, as I said before, had a bit more of a harder edged keyboard sound. They kept at it. Now, after the last core members left in the late 90s, there was a lot of rapid fire changes. A lot of albums came out during that period, but the whole band might change from one album to another. That said, the last lineup kept fairly intact for close to 10 years. Elena Polo wasn't on their final album. She and Mark Smith had split up by that point, but it was still basically the same lineup apart from her. And they'd been together for a while and recorded several albums. I will say that's the period I'm the least familiar with, but I'm enjoying what I'm discovering of them. One song that has been suggested to me by my Facebook friend Kat Slander, called Hittite Man, off the album Remit. That's a really great song. So here we are 12 minutes in, and we're now getting to my history with the Fall. It was very left-handed, which I think kind of fits with this band. That's kind of doesn't fit into any particular category of band. It was my own approach really is kind of a bit of a weird one, and how I got into them. It came through. It was, oddly enough, started at a youth group that I was in my late teens, and during one of the kind of gatherings they had, my roommate there had an album, not by the Fall, no, but it was by Pop Will Eat Itself, which is another kind of odd, neat band. And I played that album. I don't know why. I got fixated on that one album that he had on his, and there was a song called Can You Dig It? And they kept talking about stuff they were into in that one. And one of the lines was, Dirty Harry, hit the North. And I remember, okay, what's that line? That's a cool line. Where does that come from? I discovered it was a song by the Fall. There was on Much Music, back when they played music, a show on Friday nights, late Friday nights, I would regularly watch, called City Limits, and that was the alternative music show, and it was really good. I got into a lot of different artists through that. That's back before alternative became alternative rock, which is like, okay, well, bands that sound like Pearl Jam, love Pearl Jam, but they played a lot of different variety of music that just for whatever reason didn't fall into the mainstream. And I was recording on my VCR. Look it up, ask your parents, kids, any songs that caught my interest, and they did eventually play Hit the North by the Fall. And it's like, not, it's as typical of their sound as anything is, because they've had a lot of different sounds. That was sort of it was very catchy. I didn't really know what it was about, but it had this, this cool, repetitive, refrain of Hit the North. I said, okay, I want to check these guys out. Not that long after that was a school trip to New York, and that's when I had a bit of money in my pocket for my parents to, buy a few things if I wanted to. And I got my first Fall album, which was Seminole Live. Now, there's a fair number of live albums from the Fall. Um, some are Stone Cold classics. There's a few that are Stone Cold classics. There's, frankly, a fair amount of rather dodgy ones. I don't know if this one was dodgy, but it wasn't really the typical, sort of I don't know if it was typical. It was just a weird little start because it starts off with a couple of songs and it goes into this sort of very kind of really out there abstract few pieces. And then the rest is like straightforward live run throughs of some of their music of the period. It wasn't the strongest introduction to them, but I remained interested. And not long after that, I got the two albums that were out around that time, which were I Am Curious Orange and The Friends Experiment. And I really enjoyed them and was getting into, got into them, played them a lot. And after that, I would buy their albums as they came out. Now, this is an incredibly prolific band. This band has a huge back catalog. I mean, just regular studio, straightforward studio albums. During their time together, they put out 31 of them. That's not counting compilations, live albums, EPs. 31's a lot. I didn't really have any concept of how deep their back catalog went, but just about every year a new Fall album would come out, and I would get it. I want to get them, and I don't know if I really got them as in understood them, but I always found them interesting. And there usually be like 2 or 3 songs I would really get into, even if I didn't quite understand the rest of it. But I'd keep buying these albums, keep listening to them. Didn't really assimilate them that much. I don't know, it was just something this band I just thought was cool, and I wanted to keep track of them. Then it was the early to mid 90s, that there were articles in a couple of British music magazines. One was Q, and the other was Volume. Neither of those magazines are around anymore, as far as I know. But they both went in depth into the past history, and they both had kind of little discographies. And I realized, oh wow, they've got all of these other albums available, and had quick little descriptions of them. So that's when I started getting those older albums and discovering the real history of the Fall. And that was my real breakthrough moment. Like, I just gobbled those albums up and started absorbing them as much as possible. Changing pages here. And I kept getting the new ones. They're really interesting. There's a few different factors, but it was about at the late 80s. I think they just stopped, for whatever reason, my local record store just didn't quite get those albums as regularly or just didn't have the newer ones in stock. So I kind of stopped getting the newer albums at that point. And in the early 2000s was the Great Pilferage, so I lost a certain amount of stuff that I have. I haven't told you that story. I'll tell it some other time. But I lost a certain amount of the Fall albums that I did have. So I fell behind. They kept putting out more albums as they were the Fall. So there was a fair-sized backlog that built up. But eventually, this is like the past few years, I did get caught back up on. I think I've heard pretty much all the main albums at this point. Some of them I just haven't assimilated as much as I'd like to. I haven't absorbed them. So you say, well, which of them is your favorite? It's like, well, I haven't really figured that out yet. But I am, this is a band I think I'll be listening to for a long time. This is part of the appeal of it for me. I'll be listening to them for a long time and still be learning new things about them. Overall, as I say, there's why I love them. I don't know if I could explain that to you. I mean, I know I like weird music, but it's an appeal that's very difficult for this band. It's very difficult to explain to other people. Well, the lead singer's got no sense of tune and kind of mumbles some of his stuff and is very angry and belligerent, and sometimes the band goes out of tune, and they're great and awesome. It's like, well, you've really sold that to me. I definitely want to go check that out. I was at a festival recently. It was just this past weekend, and the theme of this festival was tribute bands, and there was a tribute band to Van Halen playing, and I'll say Van Halen have never been like a I like some of their stuff. I enjoy them, but they've never been a huge thing for me. But I just found myself thinking, is like, I could probably explain why a Van Halen fan loves Van Halen better than I could explain why I love The Fall. I've noticed in these videos that I make, the term mystery comes up a lot, and there's a lot of mystery to them. It doesn't lay out everything right in front of you easily so you can grasp it. You got to work for this band, and it takes a bit of repeat listening to really pick it up. To really, they're like much of my taste is the definition of an acquired taste. It's challenging. I'm not saying it's all brilliant, and maybe some person might listen and think it's not brilliant at all, but I find it interesting. I can lose myself in the lyrics. I really enjoy it. There's a lot of musical surprises in it. I find their lyrics are kind of cool, and these weird, some of these telling these weird abstract stories. There's a song called "How I Wrote Elastic Man," and it's from the perspective of a writer who basically had the one book and is trying to come up with it, and is just progressively more and more annoyed by his fans and by the press, and asking these inane questions. This lyric that runs, the Observer managed to just about the Observer magazine just about sums him up, e.g., self-satisfied, smug. I thought it was a great lyric. Another favorite song from Grotesque is "New Face in Hell," and it opens up with the lyric, "Wireless enthusiast intercepts government secret radio band and uncovers secrets and scandals of deceitful tight proportions." And just the way that was phrased. This is talking about he's going to tell his neighbor all about this when this, finally his neighbor's been murdered, and this includes a line, "The same government he and his now dead neighbor had voted for." And it's I don't know why. I just enjoy those lyrics. I find it very clever, even if I don't always quite understand what's going on. It's like a puzzle, this band is like a puzzle, and I find it fascinating. I just keep, trying to figure it out, and even I don't figure it out, I enjoy the trip that I go on. I just keep one of these bands, like, more I listen to, I keep discovering new songs. It's like, oh wow, I didn't notice this song before. On this album I've listened to a dozen times, and this one just passed me by, and now I keep repeating on listening to it. So yeah, if you want to take a trip on The Fall, take a trip down that Fall rabbit hole. As I said, 31 albums is a lot to go through. As I said, my favorite is Grotesque. Probably Light User Syndrome or Our Nation Saving the Grace are kind of the more accessible ones. Those later albums I can't really speak to that much because I'm still getting used to them. I'm still learning their story. There's a lot of compilations, and not all of them are really good. But one of my favorite, well, probably the quintessential one, as another great title because it's a parody of a best of from Elvis Presley, which was called 50 Million Elvis Fans Can't Be Wrong. So they came up with an album called 50,000 Fall Fans Can't Be Wrong. And this is it here. It's a 2-disc set. If you're sure it's available through the main streaming services. If not, call them up and protest. It does start off with Repetition, which is not one necessarily my favorite song of theirs, but it's a cool one. But then it gets going pretty quickly. It covers most of their main periods. I mean, there's a few albums that are not on it because they came out after it came out, but I think it's a pretty good representative sampling of what they did. So yeah, so that's the fall. I don't know if I got covered all the bases, but I did my best to give a decent summing up of them and explain as best as I can of why I love this weird, nutty band. So join me next time, and we're going to continue down the path of weird, culty bands with extensive back catalogs. Join me at letter G. Bye-bye.